Right, thanks everyone. And we're conscious that we're between you and lunch, so we'll get things moving. Thank you for joining us to hear more about why we think that universities should care more about foreign and direct investment, and also while we share a bit about the work that we've been doing in the Midlands through a pilot project, Universities as Drivers of FDI. As you can see, our panel's changed slightly. David Coleman has been called away at the last minute, so Joe has kindly agreed to stand in at the last minute. So we've got a panel that comprises Ruth Carver. Ruth is Chief Exec of the Greater Lincolnshire LEP and Chair of the Midlands Engine Partnership Board. We have Glenn Crocker, who's Executive Director of Ventures at Pioneer Group, and Joe, who probably doesn't need introducing, is CEO of the National Centre for Universities and Business. I'm Helen Turner, Director of the University Partnership Midlands Innovation, and Alex is Director of Global Reputation and Relations for the University of Nottingham, but he wears several hats, and so in relation to this work, he's also part of Midlands Innovation, part of the Midlands Engine, and probably a whole load of other organisations as well. This session is going to be split into two parts. First, Alex is going to present a bit of an overview of FDI and why we think it's important, and also some insights from that highlight, and then we'll move on to a panel discussion where we'll try and draw out some further insights from a number of perspectives. We want this to be a bit of an interactive session, so we're going to pose a few questions to you at the beginning, and would welcome questions from you as well. So with that brief introduction, I'll hand over to Alex.
Thanks very much, Helen. Everybody phones out because through the magic of Slido, we're going to ask for some rapid opinions and hope that the technology works as I click forward on the slides. Can everybody get their phones out and scan the QR codes on either side? It's a Friday afternoon. We can do this in a relaxed way. Okay, everybody done? A few more seconds. All right. So, first question is, my university should care about foreign direct investment. I found that you can attach little GIFs to these, which I did last night and possibly on reflection shouldn't have done. But we're getting a sense of consensus that yes, still a lot of dunnos. And helpfully for the next hour, what is FDI as it applies to universities? Going into the next question, here's an interesting one for you. If you work for a university, does your institution have, as far as you know, a dedicated strategy to secure funding for research and KE from international business? So not business brackets general, and they could be international or the UK, but something specifically focused on the international industry income piece. Okay, so far I've got quite a lot of no's, a small subset of yes. Hopefully my colleagues from the University of Nottingham have all voted yes, and lots of don't knows. And then the final question, a little bit of a guess for you. What proportion do you think of industry funding into the UK universities over the last 7 years was from overseas? So I've given some brackets here. This is HESA, Table 5A, fact fans, brackets other income. This is the only conference I can probably drop that reference, and that is meaningful. I'm going to give you a little bit longer. The results are sort of shifting a bit. Most people in the 10 to 20, 20 to 30 is currently top. Okay, well, that is in fact the answer. Over the last 7 years, and thank you very much to Joe and the team at NCUB who have been working with us at the Midlands pilot to trawl HESA for this data and insight, 56% of all industry income into contract research on the fabulous Table 5A on HESA was from overseas. And that's a £3.3 billion total revenue between 2015 and 2022. I was quite surprised when I heard that and I saw that, but actually when you start drilling into it, it does make sense. So the question, why should universities care about FDI? That's the first answer, because actually universities are already pretty major recipients and beneficiaries of foreign direct investment into their R&D activity. I'm going to give you a few other reasons why universities should care about FDI. It may have not escaped everybody in this room's notice, but it's a fairly tumultuous time with regards to international research and knowledge exchange in the UK. We still haven't associated. The longer we don't associate, the less likely we are. And so if you haven't dusted off your Pioneer prospectus recently, I would really urge you to, and in particular, look at the innovation side of things, which is, I think it's fair to say, not the most well-developed set of proposals. So if you have an idea about what you want to get when it comes to international funding for innovation, you might find it's quite helpful in the coming years to have that sense of clarity, just in case we don't manage to get Horizon Association over the line. Next up, investment zones. 12 of them announced in the spring budget, aligned to combined authorities, 8 in England and some others in the DAs. These are the first attempts, I think, by the government to seriously link universities, and research-intensive universities were particularly highlighted by the Treasury in its investment prospectus, with place and with foreign direct investment, in an attempt to sort of join up decision-making in devolved authorities, incentives, and something that specifically focuses on delivering foreign direct investment into R&D. The next reason universities should care about FDI is something that may or may not have happened in 2016, that may or may not have had a substantial impact on foreign direct investment into the UK as a whole. And actually, we were just talking earlier, we were at a conference, at the Midlands Economic Summit on Wednesday, and I think probably for the first time, somebody in the government, Lord Harrington, who's undertaking a review for the Treasury of the UK's approach to FDI, pretty much just said that Brexit has been a complete disaster for foreign direct investment, and the approach that the government have taken of pretending that it's all fine is probably not going to be able to hold much water, and they need to sort it out. And you know, whilst things are starting to increase and improve a little bit, as you can see, a pretty low bar, and there are all kinds of pieces of work from the National Audit Office that have explained in greater detail why this is. Mostly linked to Brexit, but not all. And I think that part of the problem that we have is that universities not necessarily have been part of this picture, but this is the national need, and of course it gets worse if you're outside of London and the South East. This next image is what I colloquially refer to as the sort of mad map of the Midlands, in terms of all of the different investment vehicles, organisations, remits, bodies, powers, not including planning, which of course is at borough and district council level, that are there to support inward investment. And if you look at, let's say, just around East Midlands Airport, you'll count maybe 9 organisations that have, to some degree, a remit for promoting inward investment. Now, this is confusing enough to those people that work in those organisations. It's pretty hard for universities to navigate it. Imagine being an investor and being presented with that complexity around decision-making. So again, very pleased to hear Lord Harrington acknowledge the fragmentation of the system that's sort of been the characteristics of subnational economic development policy since 2010, have created this confusion. And it is actually something that matters increasingly given the poor performance nationally that we're talking about. So what is the Midlands Universities Drivers of Trade Investment pilot? I will whip through a quick introduction to what it is to set the scene. So this is our hypothesis. Through their global connections and linkages to the local innovation ecosystem, mostly through you guys, universities can and should have a greater role in working with government and local economic organisations to, on the one hand, help attract, retain and maximise FDI into local and regional economies, not just into R&D, but particularly R&D, and that is sort of universities as generators of foreign direct investment, which aligns very nicely with the levelling up agenda. And the second is that universities should seek to increase FDI into university research, innovation and knowledge exchange activities, which is almost universities as beneficiaries, which is very much squarely in the lines of the science superpower agenda. That's our hypothesis. And over the last year or so, I think it's fair to say, we've built a proof of concept pilot. With some spin-out funding from the Midlands engine, now at scale-up phase, we've created a coalition of universities, 17 universities from across the region, local economic growth partners, including Ruth, but it's funded by the universities, DLUC, the Midlands engine, and also DSIT's International Science Innovation Tactical Fund, so the Science Innovation Network, if you're familiar with it. We've also got some funding from UKRI and AHRC and Christopher Smith to expand and extend what we're doing to cover the creative and digital industries. So all in all, about 650k worth of activity this year, and some more to carry it on moving forwards. And we want to try and develop a program that demonstrates and advocates for the role that universities can play, that looks into the sector but also into government, because having gone around the world and found out examples of which parts of the world do this properly, with universities integrated into this piece, turns out that actually in England we are particularly far behind. And just going up north of the border and talking to Scottish Development International and Scottish universities, you really get a sense of, oh, maybe we should be doing this in a little bit more of an organised, concerted way. We've focused on FDI into R&D because of government priorities and requests from funders and universities, but we're also looking more broadly around trade and the visitor economy, where universities also have a real important role to play. 4 strands of activity in the main: evidence and analysis, advocacy and awareness, developing propositions that specifically focus on what the university offer is, that have key sectors. And we're also getting involved in campaign planning, soft market testing, focusing on 4 markets, so working with the Science Innovation Network and DBT teams out in country in Australia, Germany, Singapore and South Korea, to get their sense of what does FDI into R&D mean for them. How do they find out what opportunities exist in the Midlands? And spoiler alert, they don't know what we've got. They've got no time to find it out, and so they just default promote London and the South East. And indeed, most sort of disturbingly, we were told that actually sometimes they're told to deprioritise foreign direct investment into R&D because it takes too long and doesn't create enough jobs. So, work to do on the government side, work to do on the university side. This is an interesting question. So what do you mean when you say FDI into university R&D? We've developed a taxonomy, which has actually been adopted by DSIT and is being used by them at the moment to structure their policy approach. The first is direct investment into the research base, so Table 5A, the contract research innovation activities, your clinical trials, etc., your capital, your facilities, and of course your knowledge exchange activities from overseas companies who have been based in the UK. So if a company moves in, and Ruth, correct me if this is incorrect in any way, they still count as a foreign direct investment company if they expand or extend their activities for up to 5 years. Brilliant. So that is FDI, even if you may think it's just working with a local organisation. The second is tenancy and co-location. So university science parks, innovation enterprise parks. I mean, I don't know how many overseas companies are based on our science or innovation parks, and I don't think many people do. Certainly the national organisation doesn't really have an idea. But yet that is a really important part of our offer. And a cursory look of the UK investment atlas will see loads of science parks, innovation parks as a pitch. So come and move your R&D activities next to the university. And the third is equity investments, spin out patient capital. And then this final piece, which is the generator side of things, is the extent to which your university is integrated into the local offer, which you could look at as how well are you connected to your LEP? Are you being articulated in their materials? Are you involved in outbound and inbound activities? Are you mates with your Freeport? All of those things that are very integral to the civic part of your university. So before I draw things to a close and we get into the panel discussion, I'm just going to cover some of the things in listicle form that we've found out so far in our work. And again, I'm going to give a shout out to Joe and his team at NCUB, who have been supporting the analysis and analytics side of things, who are also doing a load of work that I'm sure Joe will prelude in a second about globally mobile foreign direct investment into UK R&D. So it's a good time for us to be looking at this, for all of the reasons I touched on. Actually, the government is quite interested in it, different bits of the government are interested in it, and they realise that actually the UK can't really sort of sit around waiting for our lunch to come to us. We've actually got to go out and try and get it ourselves. And so universities being seen to be proactive in this space is helpful politically. We found out that FDI into universities is, unsurprisingly, very unevenly distributed across the UK. East of England includes Cambridge, which is why that's third. But actually, Scotland does pretty well. The Midlands, which we combine the East and the West, is not doing really as well as it should do. And this is over the last 7 years. Actually, FDI into universities is mostly from outside the European Union, which is interesting when you think about the decline in FDI into UK as a whole post-Brexit. But actually quite a lot of foreign direct investment companies that invest in universities is from outside the EU. And again, you can see in the graph here the proportion of that as well as the values, and all of the slides, by the way, will be available after the conference. We did some analysis around where and which subject codes foreign direct investment into university R&D as recorded by HESA was. And clinical medicine, as England as a whole, dominates, which is quite telling. But clinical trials, pharmaceuticals seem to be the main area and typical area where you have foreign direct investment into universities. But actually in the Midlands, it's different. So if you look at the East Midlands, you'll see mechanical, aero and production engineering as the greatest source of foreign direct investment into R&D. And in the West, it's general engineering and, of course, automotive, WMG, Birmingham, etc. will be the source for that. We work with a company called OCO Global, which NCUB are also doing some work with at the moment, to try and do a bit of a triage of investor motivations. And so they looked backwards at sort of 5 years worth of data harvested through the FDI Insights database, which is run by the FT, which asked investors into UK R&D, well, why did you do it? And interestingly, talent, to a far greater extent than in other FDI projects, was the primary reason. Now, I don't know if you've tried to brigade your talent offer as a single institution aimed at a particular investor or a particular sector, but it's actually pretty difficult to try and do it. And so one of the things that we're very keen to try and develop more is a more concerted approach to talking about talent when it comes to investment into sectors or into particular opportunities. Clusters, very trendy, very de rigueur at the moment. They are helpful, but the data is complicated and imperfect. This is a piece of work I did for the Midlands Engine with the Data City, Bohurst and WavTech, which we launched a few weeks ago at UK Reef, which tried to visualize and map out high innovation businesses in particular sectors. You get an overarching picture, but ultimately clusters are really about choices, and the data, as I said, is never perfect when it comes to firm level information in the UK. So there is a bit of a note of caution about relying this, and that note of caution is being gently passed on to colleagues in DCIT. Now when you're thinking about clusters and inward investment, it gets even more complicated. So these are just the kind of clusters in the Midlands, and on the outside you'll see a number of what are called high potential opportunity areas, free ports, or other various sort of, we're not quite sure what they are, FDI initiatives that mean that this particular place and particular sector is highlighted by the government on their UK investment atlas. And that's just the Midlands. If you're looking across the UK, it's a more complicated picture than that, and I haven't added in the investment zones yet. And then finally, I think this point, we really don't know enough. I've used data statistics drawn from one part of FDI into university R&D, which is contract research. If you were to try and say, okay, well, EU, rest of world, where specifically is that funding come from? We couldn't tell you as a country. And I'm not entirely sure we could tell you as individual institutions. If you said how many spin-out exits have been to overseas investors or equity stakes, I don't think we could tell you. I think we could just about tell you about licenses, which is recorded via HEBSIS and is publicly available. We certainly couldn't tell you about tenancy. We couldn't tell you about universities doing things outside of the recorded activities on Hepsis or HESA. It's quite hard, therefore, to develop a plan of action if you don't know what you're already doing and have done and what's worked and where it's worked. And so this is part of, again, the piece of work that NCUB are leading on behalf of the sector moving forwards. So to finish, what next? We will be trying to develop a campaign approach that helps universities in the Midlands go from an institutional priority, aggregate those up at a sub-regional level into clusters, try and scale those at a regional level through our key sectors, and then make sure that they are articulated to the campaigns and support that are articulated at national level. And so when they get to the overworked and quite stressed people in high commissions and embassies around the world, it has at least gone through some sort of process of triage and due diligence, and that they feel comfortable with pitching something that isn't just in Oxford and Cambridge to international investors. And that is what we're hopefully trying to do with GREAT, with DSIT, with UKRI, with DLUC, all in alignment. So I'll pause there, and thanks very much.
Thanks, Alex. We're happy to take questions via Slido, and I think you're going to be monitoring those, aren't you, as we go along. But to get going, I'm going to start by directing a question to Ruth, who's looking worriedly at the microphone. So,
is it working?
Yes. So, Ruth, in your role in Lincolnshire LEP, you've worked very closely with Lincoln University around attracting FDI, and as part of the pilot, Alex did a number of Pathfinder conversations where he talked to a range of Midlands universities, and I think the relationship between Lincoln University, the LEP and the City Council came through as really an example of best practice. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit through how that has worked practically. What are the lessons that people in the room could learn from what you've been doing in Lincolnshire?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Ruth Carver, I'm the Chief Exec of the Greater Lincolnshire LEP. LEP's been around for 11 years, and from the beginning we've had university involvement in our local enterprise partnership, so certainly right from the beginning the Vice-Chancellor was on the board. We also had at the start aligned strategy, which was really important right at the beginning, to have an aligned strategy of what we were trying to achieve, not just for FDI but for the economy per se. That then led to a couple of posts that were joint between the university and the LEP. There were policy posts and strategy posts, and it was a very symbiotic relationship really, in that we were able to influence and question and test each other. And I think the best conversations that we've probably had around FDI and R&D are just really visualising what kind of economy that we would want, and particularly thinking about where the gaps might be in terms of what kind of companies do we want to attract, and how can we use some of the research to attract those companies to come to Greater Lincolnshire. So a really good example, one of which we're very well known for, is something called UK Food Valley. And we've been at UK Food Valley for 10 years, so we've been co-investing, we've produced enterprise parks, we've done joint bids to UKRI, etc., etc., etc. But the big conversations, that were the best conversations that we have, is let's look at the world-leading clusters. If we want to be a world-leading cluster in food, and technology in food, what's missing? And it became pretty apparent that it was robotics and automation, and then production of actually physical manufacture of those. So that's missing in our economy. So therefore we're very specific, and we're very focused on targeting those companies to be attracted to come to Lincolnshire. And then the other thing that's really, really interesting is between we're also known for industrial decarbonisation in the Humber area, so carbon capture and hydrogen production, and some of the opportunities there and some of the outputs there are really relevant to the way that we're looking at producing sustainable food. So there's some amazing overlaps between the sectors, of which we can utilise both research and having two really important clusters. So it's been a long journey. It's been a kind of a 10-year process, but we work very, very closely with the enterprise team at the University of Lincoln, and indeed now Hull through the Humber area. But it's been a very beneficial partnership, I think. And if I think about the level of inward investment inquiries, because it's my job to take that mad map that Alex has put on there and translate that into how we work locally, really, and to see where the sweet spots are. And our, particularly in UK Food Valley, our levels of inward investment inquiries have doubled. We've managed investment levels of an additional 5 billion over the past 5 years and 7,000 new jobs as a result of that partnership. So, it's really grown the pie of international businesses, I suppose, that are in the Greater Lincolnshire area. And it hasn't been a very detailed strategy. It's been about very close working on a day-to-day basis.
Thanks, Ruth. And as part of that mad map, I know you have a food enterprise zone, and there'll be lots of people here thinking about those levelling up zones or those new investment zones. And I wondered if there was any lessons that you could draw out around kind of working with the university and other stakeholders around your enterprise zone that might be relevant.
Thank you. So we have a number of them. So we have 3 food enterprise zones, and then we have an enterprise zone, and we also have a free port. So we probably already have our own mad map, don't we, really? But it's being very specific about what product offer is the right thing to target. But ultimately, a commercial, organisation decides where it wants to go anyway, doesn't it? So, in terms of lessons learned, we're still doing this. We're still in partnership with the university. So we operate the triple helix, as everybody should be doing. The private sector working with local authorities, also working with academics, and it's a really close relationship. And so we collectively came up with the proposal that we knew that we didn't have enough assets to be able to attract companies to where we were. Despite having a good commercial base, they didn't have soft landings, they didn't have places to come to, they didn't have a real international assets such as the Lincoln Institute for Agriculture and Technology and the National Centre for Food Manufacturing. They didn't have a brand name of where they could touch in to think about innovation and product offering. So I think the lessons learned are to absolutely get your product right, and work in partnership through that entire time. We were lucky at the time because there was lots of European funding around, there was lots of single local growth funding, and because we had an aligned strategy that those were the sectors that we were going after, that's where we put our funding into, and therefore we were able to move forward with that. But it's not been an easy ride. We've had to work at it very quickly and over a long period of time. But it's about getting the right ecosystem, I think. If you can get that right ecosystem, then you can move forward with these activities.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ruth. Jo, if I could move to you. Alex alluded to the interest from government, and I know we've been working with you on this pilot for a while, and you recently chaired a webinar which had 2 ministers kind of fighting to give their contact details and to both kind of contribute to the session. I was wondered if you might be able to reflect a bit more on why you think government and ministers are kind of quite so interested in this, and the value of them being a bit more joined up.
Yeah, is this working? Yes. I'll try not to keep my eyes away from Alex as he tries to bait me into saying provocative comments about the government. But I think it's very easy though to get into a post-Brexit type discussion. I think there are 2 probably really interesting moving parts for the government. One is post-COVID. So this is about actually the world. How does the UK start to open up to these opportunities globally? And part of that is actually quite a lot of pent-up capital that is available because of COVID, not a lot has been spent. And so the UK, there's a really interesting part of the Harrington FDI review but it's about mobile investment, right? Now, that is a huge opportunity to the UK. We have traditionally been very good at this, and Alex has talked a lot about the data sets that are out there. The UK has, using those cliches, punched above its weight and been an amazingly attractive place for foreign direct investment. But it's also a huge challenge to the UK because it's very mobile. A decision that is made in Seattle or in Shanghai or in Sydney can have quite profound effects about where that investment is being made. And so I think what the government is trying to do is to not rest on its laurels. I think the second thing is that you see both technology companies or companies more generally and governments, international sort of governments, looking at the ways in which investment can kind of to sort of stay ahead of in science and technology. And so where are those opportunities to be at the forefront and cutting edge of new advances, and where can they put their money to get into those opportunities? And I think that's where there's a really interesting double act emerging between George Freeman and Lord Johnson, who are basically, they're sort of defining themselves as the CTO and the Chief Sales Officer. The Chief Sales Officer needs something to sell, and he needs it in a way in which he can package this up. Now, the Golden Triangle has been able to say, we've got two of the oldest, most established, most prestigious universities, and in a post-COVID world, we can talk to the thing that saved the world, right? That's sound bites that for a salesperson is very easy to get across. I think what Alex is doing, what you're doing in the Midlands Innovation in the Midlands, is a really important part of changing that narrative. And we're doing some really interesting work looking at the metrics. What are the things that genuinely drive this decision making, and can we kind of codify that? Because that will hopefully inform better both decision making and action.
Thanks, Joe. I was going to ask about that work and wondered whether you had any sort of insights coming through about that decision making, or some of the other analysis that you're doing as you're sort of attracting international investment study.
So 40, we are looking at 41 individual metrics categorised into 9 different pillars, and we're looking at 12 different regions across the UK. It's throwing up some fascinating stats, not only hotspots, cold spots, but actually it also talks about maturity, and to pick up on, and in the context of this audience, the role that universities play in a deliberate way to do this. And I would throw 2 provocations. We did a major task force in 2020 looking at this. We are increasingly, the UK is in an incredibly competitive global competition. And to pick up on Alex's point, there is a competition going on between England and Scotland. Scotland are ahead because they're getting more organised at this. My favourite comment is that if you go to other international capitals, countries are getting better at saying, we will join all of this up, we will help you coordinate this. We still seem to have a problem of saying, international company comes in, oh yeah, Bays, they're down there, UK, right, they're just along the river, there's some people you might want to go and see somewhere else. Other people will join that up, and it requires a mindset and a shift of the skill sets. It's not just it's not a capacity piece, it's also a capability to put yourself in the shoes of others. And I think that's where the UK has to recognise it needs to join up its offer and make it as easy as possible for that foreign direct investment to flow in.
Thanks, Joe. If I can move on to Glenn. I wondered if you could bring a bit of a private sector perspective. I mean, Pioneer Group is involved in building those ecosystems and kind of supporting investment, supporting businesses. What does kind of FDI into those businesses look like from your perspective, and what's the role of universities in kind of supporting that?
So Pioneer Group, one of the things that Pioneer Group does is provide the facilities. We develop and run and operate specialist facilities, mostly in the life sciences sector across the UK and now in Ireland. 12 sites at the moment, expanding shortly, about over 3.1 million square feet, about £1 billion worth of assets in total across the UK. And a lot of the funding for that, in fact all of the funding comes from outside of the UK. It's from Canadian, US and mainland European investors. So they're sort of FDI in practice, really to some extent. And yeah, I've been doing this for about 20 years now, and I can honestly say that we have never had a single referral from any of the government agencies that has ended up in any of our sites, and which makes you wonder what on earth is going on. But we have had referrals from the large professional services firm, the real estate agents, the Jones Lang LaSalle's and CBREs, who are really well set up to do this. And I wonder how they figure in the planning for all of this, because I think they're actually much better set up than government agencies. They have international desks, they'll gather up the opportunities, who will be their clients, they'll come to them. We need to go to the UK. They have a network across the UK and they put them out. So our focus is on building the relationships with the professional services firm as the first port of call, which is far more productive. And then, so then going on to the other part of the question, or the main part of the question that you asked, what does it mean? The reality is, for a lot of the companies that we work with, early stage startups, it doesn't mean very much at all. They're just head down, ploughing on, just trying to build their business. So whether there's a good or a bad FDI environment is neither here nor there. They want to be near the universities, so the universities' activity in the wider community is absolutely important, and that will help the companies get set up and started in a particular area. But from then onwards, what happens doesn't really matter. As the companies grow and get more mature, then they're able to sort of raise their heads and look beyond their immediate environment and realize that there are some massive benefits to building an international presence on a particular location. So getting more companies in, increasing the strength of the ecosystem, building the talent pool, potentially bringing in new partners for collaboration, potential acquisition partners as well. All of those things suddenly become a lot more important, and you start to see companies start to get involved in that. But they need to be 3, 4, 5 years down the road in order to really see that benefit.
Thanks, Glenn. Alex, I've seen you checking your phone.
Got some questions.
Have you got some good questions? Do you want to go for them?
So we've got some questions coming in. I'm going to group some of them. One of them was about the Spice Girls, which I've deleted. So thanks to whoever put that one up there. There's a range of questions about how does FDI intersect with the NSIA, so the National Security and Investment Act, and you could also say there's another legislation coming down the line. Is there a tension between attracting foreign investment but attracting the right kind of foreign investment? As a corollary to that, how much FDI has come from China, and has this proportion changed over the last few years? And what correlation is there between university levels of FDI and those that have overseas campuses? Yeah. So I can have a start at that, but I'd be interested in what others think. I mean, so as the founder and co-chair of the UK Overseas Campus Network with another hat on, I'd like to think that overseas campuses do play an important role in establishing those kind of innovation bridges between places, and certainly Lord Johnson, for some reason, was incredibly enthusiastic about it, despite no prompting or lobbying on our behalf. And I think that flow of talent and people and connections is probably helpful. With regards to money coming in from China, actually it's less than you think, because trying to get money out of China is actually quite hard. As we've all found, barring international students. So it's actually less than most people suspect. There tend to be funding for things like CPD or other activities like that. The NSIA tension is clear, though, and it's one of the reasons that Cranfield have been incredibly helpful working with us. And Karen Holford, who is their VC and chair, wrote the first of our blogs on HEPI. Do check them out, by the way, all on this topic from a number of vice-chancellors and other colleagues across the region. Because if you don't know where your investment is coming from, how can you possibly know whether it's good investment or the investment perhaps that needs to be subject to greater scrutiny? If we don't track at a country level where inward investment into R&D is coming from, or where the tenants on our science parks are owned, how on earth can we be compliant with an SIA let alone concerted about getting more investment from the parts of the world that we do want.
Okay. I don't know, Joe, is there anything you'd come back to on that?
Yeah, I mean, it is a hot topic, and I know universities have given a lot of universities giving this a lot of thought. We were helping UKRI last year, thinking through that actually for many universities this is about due diligence. This is about knowing going into these projects with your eyes open and having done as much appropriate and proportionate due diligence and thinking through where you understand it. It's when you don't ask the questions, it's when you just blindly go into these partnerships and think everything will be okay that there are problems. And I think that's, sometimes you can kind of slightly overreact to these things, and actually part of this is actually, if you've got really robust processes in place and you're following them, then that stands you in good stead, recognising all of the other tensions that this isn't that straightforward.
Thanks. Were you wanting to come in, Ruth?
Yeah, I was going to say, I guess if you've got your ecosystem right and you've got your strategy right and you've done your due diligence, you know which countries you want to focus on, and you've done that in advance before you're not being reactive, you're being proactive about, I absolutely know that I want to target the Netherlands, and I've done my research on kind of what that looks like, and I know that there are some great agri-robotics companies there that we want to tempt here. You've done that in the partnership beforehand, so I think it still goes back to having that good, strong ecosystem and having a really good target mentality about what you want to get into your economy.
Thanks.
How are investors defining talent, and what indicators are they looking for?
Yeah. Don't know. Do you have a thought on that, Joe? Anything coming out of your work?
It's early days in terms of research, so I'm not going to... I think one thing that is a more general comment about the FDI part to this and the critical role of universities is they want access to the ideas, the research, but they're as important to get access to the talent. And so the co-location, the innovation districts, the comment about kind of investors who've got that investment in kind of infrastructure, science parks, the Bruntvoods of this world, the LNGs who are investing in kind of districts and the sort of physical space. What it's providing is the proximity to talent, both undergraduate, postgraduate, future, founders, people who can kind of become CTOs and other technologies. That it's an ecosystem that they're interested in.
Thanks. I think I've got Ruth and then Glenn wanting to come in on that.
Yeah. I was thinking, if I think about the inward investment inquiries that we've had, the 70 over the last couple of years, the number one issue is about talent and the availability of the talent pool. And that is at all levels. So that's being, I suppose, reactive to those inward investment inquiries. But if you were being proactive and you built that talent pool, then you would be able to attract the investment. You've got to get the other product right, you've got to get your assets right, soft landing, etc. But the talent can be a significant attractor in its own right.
Brilliant, thank you. Glenn?
Just to say that we do a lot of analysis of the population of companies, both based on our sites and the other two things that I haven't mentioned that we do is we have a lot of venture building that goes on, and we invest as well. So all of those companies make quite a large ecosystem, analysing those, understanding what the different skill sets are needed in those different areas, and starting to build focuses in different areas. So, for example, in Nottingham, there's a very strong chemistry base and pharmaceutical sciences, which relates to the university's strengths in this area, but in the Biocity sites in Nottingham, it's incredibly strong. We've got the highest concentration of chemists anywhere in the country. And that in itself starts to become an attractor in its own right. So understanding what you've got and then starting to build on that and attracting the companies to add to the ecosystem is the way that we go about it.
Thanks. Just one last question.
Yeah, it was just on the talent point. It's really hard as a university to sort of sum up what talent you've got for a particular sector in a meaningful way with the data. So we tried doing this for the Midlands clusters work and looking at LEO data, which you have to get a special sort of exemption from the DFE to access. And then you go, all right, well, what skills do you need to be part of a space cluster? Because there's not a lot of degrees in space. And so you're then going into different subject areas. And we gave it our best shot, but actually it's pretty difficult, and that's just university level, let alone FE. But it is so important. Andy Street was at a roundtable we were doing earlier this week, and he talked about the importance of almost setting up bespoke colleges in key sectors that have kind of co-curriculum design with big investors as part of the offer. And I think the Welsh have been doing that to try and lure big manufacturing companies out of the Midlands into Wales, interestingly. So it is absolutely important and an area that we need to do far more on.
Brilliant. I'm conscious that we're sitting between everyone and lunch, and I know, Glenn, you've got to rush off really promptly, so we'll draw it to a close there. I hope that we've shown you that you should be thinking about FDI. I don't know, we were thinking maybe we'll get you to do a show of hands about whether you might take it a bit more seriously, but I'm hoping that it's just landed as a message. If you want to know more, there's the blog series that Alex alluded to that are all published on HEPI, and there's also a report that we launched in March with NCUB and other organisations that's really highlighting the role of universities in FDI and draws on some of that OCO global data that Alex mentioned. I think what's come through in the panel discussion, for me, the main sort of word, I think, or phrase was join up. And I think that the importance of join up, with universities joining up with their civic partners, their local ecosystem, but also that the need for join up at a national level, both that sort of triage service for businesses that are coming in, but also join up across government. So I hope you go away thinking about how you can join up more effectively in your local regions and think about this as an important topic. And we'll leave it there. So thank you everyone on the panel, particularly Joe for stepping in at the very last minute. Greatly appreciated. But thank you to everyone that's travelled to join us, and thank you for staying.